A Summary and Interpretation of 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, narrated and interpreted by Alexander Sandalis. So many people, especially in my demographic, are lacking a structure of how to navigate through the world, create their identity, and find their purpose within it. And this isn't just a problem with the younger demographics, but we're seeing this with more and more middle-aged men and women lost in the chaos as well. So I'll be summarizing Jordan's book while adding my own subjective interpretation onto it, like I did with the 48 Laws of Power. And this is for the hope that it can help you through that process of finding your way through that chaos. I won't be telling you how to live or what to do, but just documenting my perspective through these rules. Now, I've came to realize through my previous book summaries that you may or may not have seen on this channel that hearing an alternate perspective can aid tremendously in facilitating a greater depth of understanding of more complex ideas. So it helps bridge the gap between the ambiguous and the misunderstood. And I hope this series can help bridge that gap for both you and I. Forward. Now, why rules? We got enough rules. Like, why do we need more rules? We got the 48 Laws of Power, we got the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, we got unlimited books with unlimited rules and laws of how to navigate through life. And in the foreword, Norman eloquently puts, without rules, we quickly become slaves to our passions, and there's nothing freeing about that. And the best rules do not ultimately restrict us, but instead facilitate our goals and make for fuller, freer lives. So I guess we're just opening up with that. Rules are not bad. Rules are not constricting, but rules instead, executed correctly, are freeing. Now before I get into Rule 1, this also needs to be mentioned. Jordan is not trying to develop his own rules by wiping the slate clean, by dismissing thousands of years of wisdom. Instead, we are all standing on the shoulders of giants, Jordan included. And so, we are utilizing stories that have survived against all odds over hundreds to thousands of years, and using these stories to illustrate different facets of the human experience and these rules. Jordan makes no claim that human wisdom begins with himself, but rather turns first to his own guides, and that is exactly what I'm doing. I'm not special in doing this. No matter how many people or how few people watch this, or how few or many people take value from this, I'm not claiming to be any type of special person to create this. I'm standing on the shoulders of Jordan, and he's standing on the shoulders of many others that came before him. I'm just adding my own subjective interpretation. Yet this generation, many of whom were raised in small families by hyperactive, protective parents on soft surface playgrounds, and then taught in universities with safe spaces where they don't have to hear things they don't want to, schooled to be risk averse, has among it now millions who feel stultified by the underestimation of their potential resilience, who have embraced Jordan's message that each individual has ultimate responsibility to bear. That if one wants to live a full life, one first sets one's own house in order, and only then can one sensibly aim to act on bigger responsibilities. That needs to be said before we start this, and if you do not have the patience to hear something like that, then please leave now. This is very important because it's true. We grow up, I myself included, we grew up in a soft, cushy world. If you were born in a Western world, and you weren't born into a lower class, you weren't born into massive disadvantage, then you're probably soft. I myself included have been trying to weed this softness out of me for many, many years, one day at a time, trying to expose yourself to more things that make you uncomfortable, to more suffering. We don't suffer enough. That's what that's trying to say. We don't suffer and get uncomfortable enough. And this book will probably aim to bring that more out of people, myself included. And that's why I can't wait to really dive into this. I'll finish this introduction with one last line by Jordan. I hope that these rules and their accompanying essays will help people understand what they already know, that the soul of the individual eternally hungers for the heroism of genuine being, and that the willingness to take on that responsibility is identical to the decision to live a meaningful life. If we each live properly, we will collectively flourish. Best wishes to you all as you proceed through these pages and through this video series. Rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Conflict and territory. Now let's talk about lobsters. If you know Jordan Peterson, you would have heard him talk about lobsters a few times. So why would we need to talk about this for those unaware? Well, lobsters have quite a few similarities to humans that most people don't realize. And one of the most critical things lobsters need for their survival is shelter. And this is mainly because as lobsters grow, they molt and they shed their shells, which leaves them vulnerable. So they bury themselves under a rock and they find a home for themselves. Except often there's only a small number of shelters available in a specific territory. So if there's more lobsters than there are shelters, there's going to be conflict. This is where a dominance hierarchy is demonstrated. Often one lobster will actually fight another lobster in order to assert dominance and get their shelter. It actually begins to dance around like a boxer, raising its claws up in the air, moving forward and back, side to side, mirroring its opponent, waving its claws back and forth. And they also have these jets under their eyes where they direct streams of liquid at their opponent. And the liquid contains chemicals that tell the other lobster about their size, their sex, their health, their mood. Sometimes a lobster will automatically just back down based on that. Now, more than half the time, lobsters don't actually fight. They resolve their conflict by just asserting dominance without physically touching each other, with more expressions of dominance. But there's always going to be a loser and there's always going to be a winner. Now, the neurochemistry of a lobster actually changes depending on a win or a loss. But if a dominant lobster is badly defeated, its brain basically dissolves. It grows a new subordinate brain, one more appropriate to its new lowly position. Its original brain just isn't sophisticated to manage the transformation from king to bottom dog without virtually complete disillusion and regrowth. Anyone who has experienced a painful transformation after a serious defeat in romance or career may feel some sense of kingship with the once successful crustacean. So this is where lobster and human being similarities begin. When we win, we have certain endocrine responses in our body. Now, a lot of animals do. We know this. But serotonin being one that's very similar. Lobsters have something called octopamine, which most likely could be translated to a human being's dopamine response. Right? The neurochemistry of defeat and victory. A lobster with high levels of serotonin and low levels of octopamine is cocky strutting, sort of shellfish, much less likely to back down when challenged. This is because serotonin helps regulate postural flexion. A flexed lobster extends its appendages so that it can look tall and dangerous. Now, let's make it clear. A flexed lobster is good. A flexed human is bad, right? If you're in spinal flexion, your shoulders are rounded in, your head is down. This is the characteristics of someone who may be depressed, sad, moody. What serotonin and dopamine does for us is it extends us. It does spinal extension, so it opens up our posture. Lobsters obviously have a different skeletal system, clearly, so they're going to go in different joint actions. If we reverse the neurochemical configuration and we have a high ratio, so a lot of octopamine and low serotonin, then we produce a defeated looking, scrunched up, inhibited, drooping, depressed lobster. And Jordan humorously puts, very likely to hang around street corners and to vanish at the first hint of trouble. Well, obviously, lobsters don't have street corners, but it is an example of what humans do when they get in that state. Now, lobsters have what's called a tail flick reflex, which serves to propel the lobster rapidly backwards when it needs to escape. Now, we have our sympathetic nervous system that triggers fight, flight, or freeze in a human being. Now, often people flee from certain stressful events and to defend themselves, right? Now, this is very important. Less provocation is necessary to trigger that reflex in a defeated lobster if their octopamine is high and their serotonin is low. And you can see the echo of that in the heightened startle reflex characteristics of the soldier or the battered child with post-traumatic stress disorder. For someone who has ingrained childhood trauma, for someone who has phobias, for someone who's some type of trauma and or low serotonin, poorly functioning endocrine system that results in them being depressed or anxious, their willingness to react and be triggered by stressful situations and conflict is much higher. They're at a much higher propensity. All the girls. Now, the female lobsters, who also fight hard for territory during explicitly maternal stages of their existence, identify the top guy quickly and become irresistibly attracted to him. Well, how similar is that to the human experience? We can obviously see the similarities between a dominant lobster, a dominant male, a powerful lobster, a powerful male, and their potential to attract mates. Instead of undertaking the difficult task of identifying the best man, the females outsource the problem to their machine-like calculations of the dominance hierarchy. And this is detecting, basically, who was the most dominant lobster who's winning the most battles. It needs to be pointed out that sheer physical power is an unstable basis on which to found lasting dominance and power. This is clear. We're not lobsters. We can't operate as simply as they can. It's purely about dominance, shelter, survival, mating for them. A primatologist, Franz de Waal, found that when he was studying chimp troops, males who were more successful in the long term had to buttress their physical prowess with more sophisticated attributes. In consequence, the males who stay on top longer are those who form reciprocal coalitions with their lower status compatriots and who pay careful attention to the troop's females and their infants. The political ploy of baby kissing is literally millions of years old and ingrained in our evolution. It's very simple just to deploy dominance. It's quite lazy too as well. We see ego and dominance drive a lot of young men and women of all ages throughout our society, and it's off-putting. And the intuitive of us can detect it quite quickly. It may be superficially attractive and fleeting and exciting briefly, but over the long term, it's ugly. It's not comforting. Now, this is a metaphor for life. The dominant male, with his upright and confident posture, not only gets the prime real estate and easy access to the best hunting grounds, he also gets all the girls. The part of our brain that keeps track of our position in the dominance hierarchy is exceptionally ancient and fundamental. It is the master control system modulating our perceptions, values, emotions, thoughts, and actions. It powerfully affects every aspect of our being, with a capital B. Conscious and unconscious alike. This is why when we are defeated, we act very much like lobsters who have lost a fight. This is why this is important, because we are like lobsters in many ways, and when a human is defeated, we often exhibit the similar characteristics to a lobster, and we win, similar thing. And if things do not improve, we become chronically depressed. Under such conditions, we can't easily put up the kind of fight that life demands, and we become easy targets for harder shelled bullies. And it is not only the behavioral and experimental similarities that are striking, much of the basic neurochemistry is the same. Low-ranking lobsters produce comparatively low levels of serotonin. This is also true of low-ranking human beings. Low serotonin means decreased confidence, means closed-in body language, means you're not going to stand up straight with your shoulders back. Low serotonin means less happiness, more pain, more anxiety, more illness, shorter lifespan. High spots in the dominance hierarchy and higher serotonin levels are characterized by the opposite. The importance of this hierarchy cannot be overstated. It is an example of life. The ancient part of your brain specialized for assessing dominance watches how you are treated by other people. On that evidence, it renders a determination of your value and assigns you a status. If you are judged by your peers as of little worth, the counter restricts serotonin availability. That makes you much more physically and psychologically reactive to any circumstance or event that might produce emotion, particularly if it is negative. But you need that reactivity. Emergencies are common at the bottom, and you must be ready to survive. But this is when the brain can override the judgment made by peers. It really depends on what state you're in. I think if you're already in that low dominant state, low serotonin state, well, you're much more easily susceptible to being affected by others' judgments. But on the other hand, a high serotonin, high dominance individual is much less likely to be susceptible to other people's judgments. When operating at the bottom, which many are and trying to get out of, our ancient brain assumes that even the smallest unexpected impediment might produce an uncontrollable chain of negative events. It's like a positive feedback loop. On the other hand, if you're high status, high dominance, high serotonin, our pre-reptilian mechanics assume that your niche is secure, productive, safe, and that you will be well buttressed with your social support. It thinks the chance of something will damage you is low and can be safely discounted. Change might be opportunity instead of disaster. The serotonin flows plentifully. This renders you confident and calm, standing tall and straight, and much less on constant alert because your position is secure and the future is likely to be good for you. It's worthwhile to think in the long term and plan for a better tomorrow. There's countless benefits to being high dominance, high status, high serotonin. But sometimes there's malfunction. This will point out how the simple act of standing up straight with your shoulders back, well, it can be made a lot harder when the following situation is created. The body needs to function like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Every body system must play its role properly and at the exact right time, or noise and chaos ensues. It is for this reason that routine is so necessary. The acts of life we repeat every day need to be automized. They must be turned into stable, reliable habits so they lose their complexity and gain predictability and simplicity. This can be perceived most clearly in the case of small children, who are delightful and comical and playful when their sleeping and eating schedules are stable, and horrible and whiny when they are not. I just believe so wholeheartedly that you need habits to create order. I think habits are a sign of intelligence in a man or woman. The easier thing to do would just be create no habits and just brazenly do whatever you want, whenever you want, at any time, and not worry about the consequences of a lack of structure. You don't have to be extreme and be overboard with structure, which some people who are very high in conscientiousness, like myself, can do. But instead, creating rituals for yourself to create order and mitigate the chaos. That's all it is. It's mitigating the chaos so you can just navigate through life just a little better, just a little easier, just with a little less pain, with a little less unnecessary suffering. And what I'm about to read from Jordan are some really practical, applicable, very simple things you can do to change your habits that will fix so much of the unnecessary pain, suffering that many people go through. Now, for those who don't know, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He's had his own practice for many years. He would always ask first his clinical clients about their sleep. Do they wake up in the morning at approximately the time the typical person wakes up? And do they do it at the same time every day? If the answer is no, fixing that is the first thing. Having a efficiently running circadian rhythm is critically important for hormonal regulation, for mood, for all our body systems. If we put the sleep out of whack, we put our body out of whack, we put our mind out of whack. Doesn't matter so much what time they go to bed, it's having the consistency of waking up at the same time. And often, many people don't know, this is the field I work within, often I recommend waking up with the sun. That is how we've evolved. And often you'll find, for most people, it just feels right. It just makes sense, waking up as the sun rises. Anxiety and depression cannot be easily treated if the sufferer has unpredictable daily routines. Go back. Click the backspace. Double tap your screen. Anxiety and depression cannot be easily treated if the sufferer has unpredictable daily routines. And if you don't think you have anxiety and if you don't think you have depression, think again. Because it's not about that. It's about suffering. Suffering cannot be easily treated if you have unpredictable daily routines. The systems that mediate negative emotion are tightly tied up to a properly cyclical circadian rhythm. The second thing he asks about is, what is their first meal of the day? Jordan counsels his clients to eat a high-fat, high-protein, heavy breakfast as soon as possible after they wake. This is something that has been echoed by many scientists and health professionals like Dr. Rhonda Patrick, to authors and entrepreneurs like Tim Ferriss. And this is something I practice myself. The purpose is to mitigate carbohydrates and sugars because they spike your insulin levels, they spike your blood sugar. Anxious and depressed people are already stressed enough. They already put enough stress on their body. Now, if you put another stress, like causing the pancreas to secrete all this insulin and uptake all the flood of glucose and cause all this inflammation, you make your job so much harder to heal yourself. You can cause further insulin resistance and just make your body much less efficient at shuttling glucose to the requisite muscle and liver, and instead, because you've filled up your muscle and liver with as much glucose it can take, it gets converted to adipose tissue. Jordan said he's had many clients whose anxiety was reduced to subclinical levels merely because they started to sleep on a predictable schedule and ate a high-fat, high-protein breakfast. And a third malfunction that can inhibit such a simple stance as standing up straight with your shoulders back is creating positive feedback loops with self-destructive habits like addiction, alcohol, drugs, sex, etc. Jordan defines a positive feedback loop with this example very well in a way I've never heard anyone do. Now, we know a positive feedback loop requires an input, an amplifier, and some form of output. So imagine a signal is picked up by the input, amplified, and then emitted in an amplified form. The trouble starts when the input detector detects that output and it runs it through the system again and again, amplifying and emitting it. A few rounds and it intensifies and things get dangerously out of control. This is an example of what happens with self-destructive habits. Have you been around a speaker where you could put the mic too close to a speaker at a concert or at any venue and it starts making this very loud ringing sound and gets louder and louder and louder and louder? That's what happens to so many people. We judge so easily to these people who have addictions and who suffer from these different illnesses, right? But most don't understand what it's like to actually be in their body. I don't. Most don't. And I think that example is the closest thing that we will get to understanding what it feels like. It sounds like a constant ringing, a constant amplifying ring that just doesn't end. And that sounds terrible. An example would be someone who has an anxiety disorder such as agoraphobia. People with agoraphobia become so overwhelmed with fear that they don't even leave their home. And agoraphobia is a consequence of this feedback loop that associates certain locations or events with anxiety. And a pre-agoraphobic woman leaves her house, goes to the shopping mall. It's busy. It's difficult to park. She's feeling a little anxious and stressed. Thoughts of vulnerability occupy her mind from a previous bad trauma, and unpleasant experiences start to rise in her. They trigger her anxiety. Her heart rate rises. She begins to breathe shallowly, quickly, and she feels like she's going to panic and she's having a panic attack, and triggers more anxiety, and she keeps going, and she has to leave. Positive feedback loop. As soon as the anxiety transforms into panic, which is designed for actual real threats, which she's not physically being threatened by, she feels fear, overwhelmed, goes to the doctor, nothing wrong, but she's not reassured. Goes to the mall again. Alright, let's just try one more time. She has the same thing happens. Now the mall's not safe. Their anxiety systems are practical. They assume that anything you run away from is dangerous. The proof of that is, of course, the fact you ran away. So now that place is not safe. And this cycle repeats, and soon enough, nowhere is safe except her home. And not even then, eventually her home isn't safe, and she feels anxiety in her home. Now, people can find themselves in these trap situations often because maybe they were bullied and they couldn't fight back. Well, they weren't willing to fight back, or they didn't know how to fight back. This often happens, Jordan points out, to people by the temperament of quite compassionate, self-sacrificing, particularly if they are also high in negative emotion. It also happens to people who have decided for one reason or another that all forms of aggression, including even feelings of anger, are morally wrong. Those who are only or merely compassionate and self-sacrificing and naive and exploitable cannot call forth the genuinely righteous and appropriately self-protective anger necessary to defend themselves. If you can bite, you generally don't have to. When skillfully integrated, the ability to respond with aggression and violence decreases rather than increases the probability that actual aggression will become necessary. But you have to have the capacity to do it. You have to have the courage to have the capacity to express this as a defense mechanism against the world. Otherwise, you get trampled on. People walk all over you. you'll become a mere shell of who you could be. Naive, harmless people usually guide their perceptions and actions with a few simple axioms. People are basically good. No one really wants to hurt anyone else. The threat, and certainly the use of force, physical or otherwise, is wrong. These axioms collapse or worse in the presence of individuals who are genuinely malevolent, because those who aim to harm have become specialized to prey on people who think precisely such things. That's what they don't understand. Under such conditions, the axioms of harmlessness must be retooled. In my clinical practice, I often drew the attention of my clients who think that good people will never become angry to the stark realities of their own resentments. So now, it's like a mirror reflecting back on them. They realize, wait, I have resentments. This is the form of anger. This is the form of negative emotion that I so despised and didn't want to be a part of. I'm capable of this same emotion that I so despise, then what am I? It's very confronting. No one likes to be pushed around, but people often put up with it far too long. So I get them to see their resentment first as anger, and then as an indication that something needs to be said, if not done, not least because honesty demands it. When naive people discover the capacity for anger within themselves, they are shocked, sometimes severely. A profound example of that can be found in the susceptibility of new soldiers to post-traumatic stress disorder, which often occurs because of something they watch themselves doing rather than because of something that has happened to them. They react like the monsters they can truly be in extreme battlefield conditions, and that revelation of that capacity undoes their world. And no wonder, perhaps they assume that all of history's terrible perpetrators were people totally unlike themselves. Perhaps they were never able to see within themselves the capacity for oppression and bullying. And that's the thing. We all have that capacity. That is one of the biggest lessons Jordan Peterson has taught me. He's taught me that we all have the capacity for that evil, to be the most terrible perpetrators of history. People look back on the Holocaust, and this is an example Jordan uses, so this is not my example. People go back and think about the Holocaust and what a terrible atrocity it was to persecute so many people. Okay, true. But what if we were born in that time? And what if you were on the other side? What if you weren't a minority? What if you weren't a Jew? You think, no, I could never do something like that. You don't think people just like us had the same feelings just like us 50, 60, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, just continuing on from the previous atrocities? You don't think these people have thought, I could never do something like that? Yet they were confronted with a choice. They were confronted with a choice to be malevolent, and they chose it. We all have the capacity to perform the worst atrocities imaginable. And you need to imagine that, and you need to think about that. Because if you don't, I don't even know if you don't. What happens if you don't? I can't even articulate it. I cannot even articulate what happens if you don't. Jordan's talked about this much better than I can articulate. I can't do it. Not right now. You need to think about it. The same way we need to think about death and suffering and memento mori. Remember that you will die. You know, the same way we need to think about that, we need to think about and put ourselves in the perspective and visualize what it would actually be like to perform the worst atrocities imaginable. And only then, I think that's it, only then can you actually be good. Is once you dip your toe into evil. Only then can you be good. But when the awakening occurs, when the once naive people recognize in themselves the seeds of evil and monstrosity and see themselves as dangerous, or at least potentially their fear decreases. This was me. They see that they have the ability to withstand because they are terrible too. They see they can and must stand up because they begin to understand how genuinely monstrous they will become, otherwise feeding on their resentment, transforming it into the most destructive of wishes. To say it again, there is very little difference between the capacity for mayhem and destruction integrated and the strength of character. This is one of the most difficult lessons of life. It is. And when I heard Jordan say it, my whole perspective shifted on how I perceive evil and good. One of the biggest revelations I've had in the last 5 years was at the hands of this man, at the words of this man. Maybe you're a loser, and maybe you're not. But if you are, you don't have to continue in that mode. Maybe you just have a bad habit. Maybe you're even just a collection of bad habits. Nonetheless, even if you came by your poor posture honestly, even if you were unpopular or bullied at home or in grade school, it's not necessarily appropriate now. You have to face it. Circumstances change. If you slump around with the same bearing that characterizes a defeated lobster, people will assign you a lower status, and the old counter that you share with crustaceans sitting at the very base of your brain will assign you a low dominance number, and your brain will not produce as much serotonin. This will make you less happy, and more anxious and sad, and more likely to back down when you should stand up for yourself. It will also decrease the probability that you will get to live in a good neighborhood, you have access to highest quality resources, and obtain a healthy, desirable mate. It will render you more likely to abuse cocaine and alcohol as you live for the present in a world full of uncertain futures. It will increase your susceptibility to heart disease, cancer, and dementia. All in all, it's just not good. See, rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. It's a lot more than standing up straight with your shoulders back. It's literally the way you interface with the world. It's literally how you do everything. People look at the title chapter of this and like, what? That's it? If that's your response, well, hopefully that's not your response anymore, because it's clearly much more than that. That's why this has gone on for so long, right? That's why I've quoted Jordan so many times and summated so much of his words, because it's all relevant. It's all important to realizing that is much more than the superficial. And when we talk about standing up straight with your shoulders back, well, this is a form of open, positive body language. Emotion, Jordan says, emotion is partly bodily expression and can be amplified or dampened by that expression. There's a really great TED Talk by Amy Cuddy on how your body language shapes who you are, how it influences the hormones that you secrete, and how it influences your ability to assert influence over other people. So this has been done through research, and I'll put the link in the description below. Jordan echoes it here. If your posture is poor, for example, if you slump your shoulders forward and rounded, chest tucked in, head down, looking small, defeated, like Amy talks about in her TED Talk, then you will feel small, defeated, and ineffectual. But if you start to straighten up, people will look at you and treat you differently. But you might object. The bottom is real. Being at the bottom is equally real. A mere transformation of posture is insufficient to change anything that is fixed. If you're in a number 10 position, then standing up straight and appearing dominant might only attract the attention of those who want, once again, to put you down. And fair enough. But standing up straight with your shoulders back is not something that is only physical, because you're not only your body, you're a spirit, so to speak, a psyche as well. Standing up physically also implies and evokes and demands standing up metaphysically. Standing up means voluntarily accepting the burden of a being. Your nervous system responds in an entirely different manner when you face the demands of life voluntarily. You respond to a challenge instead of bracing for a catastrophe. You see the gold, the dragon hordes, instead of shrinking in terror from the all too real fact of the dragon. You step forward to take your place in the dominance hierarchy and occupy your territory, manifesting your willingness to defend, expand, and transform it. That can all occur practically or symbolically as a physical or as a conceptual restructuring. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. It means deciding to voluntarily transform the chaos of potential into the realities of habitable order. It means adopting the burden of self-conscious vulnerability and accepting the end of the unconscious paradise of childhood, where finitude and mortality are only dimly comprehended. It means willingly undertaking the sacrifices necessary to generate a productive and meaningful reality. To stand up straight with your shoulders back means building the ark that protects the world from the flood, guiding your people through the desert after they have escaped tyranny, making your way away from the comfortable home and country, and speaking the prophetic word to those who ignored the widows and children. It means shouldering the cross that marks the X, the place where you and being intersect so terribly. It means casting dead, rigid, and too tyrannical order back into the chaos in which it was generated. It means withstanding the ensuing uncertainty and establishing, in consequence, a better, more meaningful, and more productive order. So, attend carefully to your posture, Quit dropping and hunching around. Speak your mind. Put your desires forward as if you have had right to them. At least the same right as others. Walk tall and gaze forthrightly ahead. Dare to be dangerous. Encourage the serotonin to flow plentifully through the neural pathways desperate for its calming influence. People, including yourself, will start to assume you are competent and able, or at least they will not immediately conclude the reverse. Emboldened by the positive responses you are now receiving, you will begin to be less anxious. You will then find it easier to pay attention to the subtle social cues that people exchange when they are communicating. Your conversations will flow better with fewer awkward pauses. This will make you more likely to meet people, interact with them, and impress them. Doing so will not only genuinely increase the probability that good things will happen to you, it will also make those good things feel better when they do happen. Thus strengthened and emboldened, you may choose to embrace being and work for its furtherance and improvement. Thus strengthened, you may be able to stand even during the illness of loved ones, even during the death of a parent, and allow others to find strength alongside you when they would otherwise be overwhelmed with despair. Thus emboldened, you will embark on the voyage of your life. Let your light shine, so to speak, on the heavenly hill and pursue your rightful destiny. Then the meaning of your life may be sufficient to keep the corrupting influence of mortal despair at bay. Then you may be able to accept the terrible burden of the world and find joy. Look for your inspiration to the victorious lobster with his 350 million years of practical wisdom. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Because it's a lot more than standing up straight with your shoulders back.